and welcome to this evening's session. I'm Professor Jeanette Maritz, and I'll be journeying with you tonight and tomorrow night. We have two sessions on your literature review. So the first one, part one, is this evening, and then tomorrow evening, the same time, we'll be doing part two. So you can imagine this is quite a hefty a part of our research, and so there is quite a bit of content to share, but I hope that it won't be too overwhelming. So for now, I'm going to close my screen when I start presenting. Please keep pen and paper or something to make notes on close to you. After the presentation, you can put your comments, your questions in the Q&A section, and we will be going over to that after the presentation. Now, I was just joking, my slide contains 64 slides, but I won't scare you off. We won't do all of them tonight. So what I would like to do with you tonight is go through much of the theory around literature reviews, what they are, what they're not, and how we go about doing a literature review, and then tomorrow night more of the application with less theory load. So don't be overwhelmed for tonight if it's your first attempt at a literature review or you are new to literature reviews. We will go over to more practical examples tomorrow evening, but first for tonight, we will be looking at more of a theoretical base. So when we look at tonight's session specifically, we're going to look at the following aspects. So the purpose of this session for tonight is that we have a look at what a literature review is, and by way of speaking through the slides tonight, also what a literature review isn't, the types of literature reviews, how do you match sources to review types, and a brief introduction to structuring your review. So let's get started. For our first part, in terms of just looking at what the purpose is of a literature review. So the purpose of a literature review is to survey, analyze, and synthesize scholarly literature. Now, we will later on also discuss non-scholarly literature, but usually, especially in the first parts when we start reading, we might start off with scholarly literature, and then there are also types of literature review where we do allow other types of literature, and we'll speak about that as we go along. But very important is these three concepts: to survey, that means that we're looking at; to analyze, meaning that we take apart the literature; and then to synthesize the literature in a new piece of work, or what is then called your literature review. So please remember these three steps, or these three processes: to look at, to analyze, meaning taking apart, and then, very important, and this we often miss in literature reviews, is that we put it back together again, and that is the synthesis aspect. So the review, the content we will look at is what your literature review might contain, is having a look at existing research, so what is out there, what has been studied, what research has been done, by whom, where, and on what. The review could also cover theories, discourses on a topic, and gathering evidence to support the claims that we make. So, your own critical evaluation and discussion of the content, where you now indicate your point of view, your take on the controversies, or your input to the discourses, and the gap identified that you aim to address in your research, must come at some point in your literature review. So it's not just about what others says and what others have done, but your literature review also becomes a main part of not only telling the reader what is out there, but also putting your study within the discourses or the gaps that you have identified as part of your literature review. So very important as I always say in my presentations, who is your reader? Your first reader is the examiner. So yes, your supervisor will read your literature review, but you need to demonstrate to the examiner of your either your honors more scoped survey or a study, your master's dissertation or your doctoral thesis, you need to demonstrate to the examiner that you are familiar with the existing knowledge and debates in the field or within the topic that you are looking at. So very, very important that these aspects come through when you're doing your literature review. And we'll be circling back to this every now and again in tonight's presentation. So, what can a literature review then do? Now, a literature review can do a number of things throughout your project or your dissertation or your thesis. So, when we start looking at, for instance, a potential topic, our literature review can find out what information exists on the topic. It can also help identify gaps in the literature. It can show relationships between previous studies or theories. It can potentially identify methodologies and techniques. And it could also identify people working in the field who are the main voices and provide seminal works. So, literature review can do a number of things in different parts of your, not just your thesis or dissertation or your project, but also in your proposal stages. Now, when you are initially reading in terms of your topic and you read literature for identifying either a topic or delineation of a topic in terms of what has been done, those are often where you read more widely. And that is typically in the beginning stages of your proposal writing or in the phases where you try to refine a topic. So initial reading might be quite broad. And then as we identify our topic, our reading of literature might be more focused as we carry on. And then these other aspects might come into play. So if we look at mastering the literature review process, and I think that's also very important to keep in mind that the literature review is a process. It's never really done until you submit your dissertation or your thesis or your project. Remember, honors project might take you a year or 6 months, a dissertation 3 years, and a PhD 5 years. And in that time, literature changes, research changes. So for the first reading for your proposal, you might follow up with a chapter 1 and a chapter 2. Towards the end of your study or even in between, you'll continuously go back to your literature review and update it. So it's never completely done until the day you submit. Another reason for submitting within the time allocated is that you don't need to have to read your literature review by the time you've spent maybe 7 or 8 years. So a good motivation to finish in time. But we'll speak about the currency of your literature resources shortly. So, as we said, when we start off with the process, our reading is more wide, and that's typically to clarify your research topic or your research question. So, in that initial stages, we are attempting to define the scope and the focus of our study. And that's an iterative process. I think the big secret behind any literature review is that as you read, you write, and as you write, you read, and as you read and you write, you start refining. So very important that you don't just read and read and read and read. Eventually, you'll get so lost in everything that you read. So it's very important to also write down or jot down ideas, see what themes are maybe coming up initially, drawing mind maps. So those are all processes that takes you beyond just reading. Reading is fine for initial stages, but as you carry on, you will see that you do need to do some writing as well. So once we've clarified our research topic and refined our research question, we might consider what type of a review we are going to do, or for which part of our proposal are we reading. And that's also very important. Remember, you will find literature already in your introduction of your proposal, for instance. You will definitely find literature in your background. You will find literature in your problem statement. And those are all aspects before you get to your formal literature review on the topic. So we will read for specific key focus areas as we carry on. So there's literature present in all aspects of our proposals, not just in terms of the literature review. And as I will tell you later, it's a very iterative process. So you might initially start with a literature review, reading and writing broadly, and that might inform your research problem or justification of your research. And that might then link to the earlier stages of your proposal, or it might then stay in your literature review, the formal section of your literature review in your proposal or your dissertation or in your thesis. So we will talk about determining the types of reviews and the types of sources as we carry on. But I just wanted to give you a broad overview of what the process looks like. So once we've determined the purpose of the review, we will select relevant databases and sources. We will identify key concepts and key words that would help us refining our search strategies. We will decide if we know what type of review we're doing, what are the inclusion and exclusion criteria for the sources that we are using. And then comes the conducting of a systematic literature search, where we use search operators and we are working on search databases in terms of guiding us where we can find the literature relevant to our topic. Once we've done that, we will retrieve and review full texts. So we might initially start by reviewing abstracts to find if they meet the inclusion or exclusion criteria or if they fit within our topic. So there is a large part of our reading when we start to access and evaluate the articles and texts. We might screen, as I said, titles and abstract before we read the full article to make sure that we're not reading something that's not relevant. Or you might find out only while you're reading if this literature is of value to your study. Then comes the organizing of the literature thematically. Remember, we said we first scope, or we first look at what we have, then we start analyzing, and then we start putting it back together. So once we start grouping studies into themes, that's the point where we start synthesizing and putting our literature back together. And then we take notes and either begin or continue to synthesize our literature, where we start identifying patterns and gaps. So that's more or less the process to keep in mind as we go into some more details. So part of the purpose for this evening is to discuss the types of sources. So when we refer to sources, we mean where do we get literature from? So our sources might be facts, statistics, or research findings. It might be theories and interpretation. It might be methods and procedures. It might be opinions, belief, or points of view. And it might be anecdotes, clinical impressions, or narration of incidents and situations. Now, very important, you will see that these are staggered. So your facts, statistics, and research findings are at the top. And then when we move down, we would find opinions and beliefs and points of view, and then anecdotal reports or narrations or incidents and situations. So when we look at facts, statistics, and research findings, these we will typically then find in journals, books, reports, thesis, dissertation, conference proceedings, and then potentially, if we're going to look at policies or government circulars, computer databases, but also very important to remember grey literature, and that refers to unpublished literature. Now, you'll often find that dissertations and theses might not end up in an article. It might end up as a dissertation or a thesis, which is found in the university libraries, or what they call repositories. And these very often don't make it into research papers. So these are unpublished literature, and therefore also very important to look at when you are potentially looking at literature for your topic, gaps, or potential findings. And then grey literature is a literature that might come up in more general publications. It might be research-based, it might not be, but these are generally unpublished literature or other sources of data. So you can see that we can pull in different types of sources, and when we talk about the different types of reviews, I'll also show you where we can potentially use these different sources of information. Now, before we get into the nitty and gritty of a literature review, I'm going to just share with you some very, very important information. If you don't know or use it yet, these would be very important aspects to acquaint yourself with maybe before you start formalizing your literature review. So first of all, familiarize yourself with the UNISA library site. And I've given you the link to the UNISA library that you will inevitably use in your, or should be using in your literature searches for your databases and articles. Now, the UNISA library is one of the biggest, gives you the biggest access to research articles free of charge in the Africa context. So often you will maybe look, students very often start with Googling, and you might find that you have an article and you try to read the article, and it says you either need to access that article via your institutional library, or that you need to pay for this article. Now, there's no need for you to ever pay for an article, but you need to work through the UNISA library, and you will be able to find your way through that. So I'm going to give you a few slides just to orientate you. The library does a full orientation, but very often our students start with Googling or other ways of research, which I'm not saying is bad. Sometimes it's gives you a quick overview of how much has been done on a topic, or you can Google a certain aspect and you will get, either a lot or very few hits on that specific search. So not saying that it's not a good way to start. But please, every department or every school has a librarian that is appointed to that specific department or school. And you can also then go to them and request literature searches, or that they will assist you with your literature searches. So very important to also attend library training. There is library training that carries on all year around, and you will find the specific training events and calendar on the library landing page. What you'll also find in the library pages is something like this, where it gives you library guides, finding e-resources, catalog searches, finding e-reserves, and e-publication finders. Now, you will see that there are also announcements. There's services for new students, there's services for undergrad students, and then very important, there's services specifically dedicated for postgraduate students. So just a clip, you will see library training that's available, introducing you to the library service, introducing the use of the catalogs, to how to use e-resources, using reference sources, and an introduction to different reference techniques, and these change as they update the training throughout the year. Then also you will find very, very important to have and to maybe become acquainted with very early in your literature research is that you start using reference managers. The year as well, training covers the refining reference sources, types of reference sources, and how to access reference sources. And then also very important that in terms of postgraduate students, specific training and assistance with your literature searches. So the library site and the librarian and your ability to navigate this site will really assist you to a great extent. So if you're very new, you've never done this, and even if you're a learning student or you've never used it, please visit the library site. It is very, very useful. What you'll also find is different apps that can assist you with your literature reviews, also access to different reference managers, and that's helping you to assist with your reference lists, your insight references, but also very much also focused on project management skills. You can use, there's access to different tools and applications that can help you in your research journey or in the planning the project of your research, your dissertation, and your thesis. So there's also assistance for you for the softer skills, downloads for focusing, white noise. There's many tools that the library offers that can assist you. So hopefully you have the message now that you become acquainted with the library site, you become acquainted with the librarian, and you become acquainted with what they can offer. So the biggest message is that you are not alone with your literature review and your searches. There is assistance from the library, so please make use of it. There's really top guides. There's also access. You don't need to buy expensive books, methodological books. Most of the methodological books are in the form of ebooks that you can access via the UNISA library. All right. So not saying that you don't ever buy your own methodological books. You might want to investigate in two or so from, if you're a PhD student, but even from master students. So good to have your own books as well, but they are accessible on the UNISA library site. Okay, so how do we start? I usually ask all my students to start by identifying the top 5 to 10 journals in your field, or journals that speaks to your topic. Now, if you're very new, you might not know what these journals are. And you might need assistance to find them. So you can literally Google what is the top 5 journals in, for instance, using my background, nursing education, or the top 5 journals in financial accounting, or the top 5 journals, whatever it is, whatever your field of focus is. And the reason why I suggest you start from that is that you get to really top authors and articles straight away. We'll speak a bit more about choosing and reviewing the quality of the articles and literature review sources in a while. But what if you have identified the top journals and you start searching within those journals regarding your topic, you will already acquaint yourself with the top voices in the field. You will be able to start identifying who they are, the discourses in really well-known journals. And that's a good vantage point to start off with. I'm not saying that you can't use local journals or lower tier journals, but starting with the top is always a good idea. And I know the students are quite lazy to do that. They grab every source very often that they can get hold of that would support an idea. But if you work this way, it already starts orientating you what the writing style is in top journals. If your literature review comes from these top journals, for instance, the chances that you'll be able to publish your literature review is also greater. So you are practicing on many levels. So please give that a go. I know very often we want to do it, get down and dirty and do it as quick as we want, but I promise you it pays off. Then identifying the most prominent voices in your field. So when we do research, we stand on the shoulder of giants, or we start off very often on standing on the shoulder of giants. So it's important to identify who's the top authors regularly cited from articles, who's the top theorists potentially, and that would also then help you in identifying some of these prominent voices or discourses. You can also identify the literature conventions in your field or your school, in your department. So some departments have manuals that would guide the students. Not all do, but if it is available, please make use of that as well. Also important that you could create a Google Scholar alert. There's also alerts on Mendeley and many of these reference program sites. So if you want to create, for instance, a Google Scholar alert, remember that will give you, when a new article comes out, you will get an alert in terms of the latest publications, which is always useful to just check as you carry on. You must remember that for research to end up in a journal is often already 2 or 3 years old if it's a top journal. So the publication process for research findings takes quite a while. It can be a year, 2 years, or up to 3 years before it's published. So please keep up to date with what's the latest developments in your field. And I've given you just a short brief there as to how you can set up a Google alert. And there's many other research forums and apps that will also create alerts. But then you get a new alert in your inbox of your email as soon as they appear. You would need to sort through these, but at least you're sure that you're getting an update regularly. So when we start with our searching for our topic, once we have more or less an idea what our topic is and what we are searching for, we can then start looking at our research question, but also our literature review question. So please remember that doing a literature review is a project in its own, with its own methodology. So as much as you would have a research question, that research question might also dedicate or dictate what the question is that you will ask for your literature review. So, for instance, what is the state of knowledge or current discourses on organizational bullying? That might be a very specific question in a literature review for instance, a scoping review. So it's very important that we develop a specific not just the research question, but also a question for our literature review that can guide us in our reading. So we can then, if we know what the question is that's guiding us, We can search for books, periodicals, those are journal articles, papers with valuable data or insights about your subject, web pages, academic theses, dissertation, conference proceedings, digital prints, reports from government or commercial sectors. And please look at depending exclusively on easily accessible electronic full text resources. So I know the question is going to come up about ResearchGate. And if that's a search engine, ResearchGate is not a search engine, it's a research repository. Sometimes you will find full text, otherwise sometimes you need to ask the authors, but that's a repository, it's not a search engine per se. We'll speak about that in a bit. So very important, once you've identified, for instance, an article, that you start evaluating the source. And that goes back to, in my previous slides, if you've been to this training previous years, I had a slide in that speaks about GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, but I've removed it because it creates confusion. But it goes to this principle, if you read garbage, and that's a very crude way of saying, but if you read maybe research that is in not reputable journals and so on, that is a low level to start on, and then your output would be on a low level as well. So ideally, we want to evaluate our sources. So first of all, how reputable is the source? If it comes from a top-rated journal, not saying things don't sneak through, but you can be more confident in terms of the type of sources, the type of research done, the type of evidence presented, and fitting into larger discourses. Is the source current? Now, this shouldn't actually be a debate, but you will often find that if you just Google sources, it gives you sources from 2007 or 2011, and it gives the impression that nothing has been done on your topic for the past 10 or 11 or 20 years. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean that you cannot use seminal sources, and then you should go to the original. Now, a seminal research source could be, for instance, Bloom's taxonomy or Frere's critical pedagogy. Those are seminal sources or seminal theories, and there the currency of the source doesn't come into play. But we are speaking about current sources and the 3 to 5 years. Now, the knowledge is produced in different rates in different fields. So, for instance, in AI, 3 years is far dated already. There you would look at 3 weeks probably before a source is potentially dated. But generally, if you can you can set your searches when you look at specific journals, you can select which dates you wanted to capture. So you can, if there's historical relevance and it's important for your topic or for your background, that you show how historically how things in your field or in a certain topic have developed, then certainly, yes, you can go back longer. But that would be in terms of, is there historical relevance or developmental relevance to the older sources. But then at some stage you need to end up with recent sources. Then, is the source peer reviewed? Now you will see that peer review is where author will submit an article to a journal. it's sent out to 2 or 3 reviewers that will look at the quality of the article, the scientific relevance of it, and it might go through a number of peer reviews before it's published. So when you know that an article has been peer reviewed and is in a peer reviewed journal, then you can also assume a certain level of quality. You can go further, and I'll give you an example, a slide now, how you can identify the source's impact factor. So different journals have different impact factors, and the higher the impact factor, the more relevant or the more valuable the source might, or the article might be. Then, is the author from a reputable institution? And have you seen the author cited in other sources? So that will also give you an idea in terms of discourses and critical voices and the quality of potential articles. Now, if you wanted to quickly know the quality of a journal, you can go to Sky Mago Journal and Country Ranking, and there is the link that you can put in, and then you can enter the journal title or publish a name, and it will then, if this is a journal that is within the quintile 1, 2, 3, or 4 rankings, it will take you to the page of a specific journal. For instance, I looked for higher education, research and development. It will tell you from which country it is, what is the subject areas, and who the publisher is. And then if you look a bit further, it will give you this Q identifier, and it would give you the impact factors. So this journal is a Q1, which is the highest ranking for a journal, and it has an impact factor at that stage, for instance, of 1.46. And so you can get journals that's Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. And there might be journals that fall out of those, and it might be because a journal is only started now, and that doesn't mean to say that it has lower quality, but this is just one way in which you can measure the quality of a potential publication. You can also go via the UNISA library site, where it will also then give you the databases for different publishers. So you'll see Google Scholar appears there, but then you can have direct access to EBSCOhost, to Emerald, JSTOR, ProQuest, Springer, Taylor and Francis, and there's many. But the library can also show you how to get to these search engines, and then also search for specific journals. So those are all technical things long before you even start reading. So up to now, we've basically discussed how do you get to a credible, potentially a credible source for starting your literature review, so that you base your literature review on current, good quality, peer-reviewed articles that you can trust. So once you start, once you've identified your articles, you will start selecting what you can decide, are you starting to read on a first come first serve basis? Are you already starting to maybe put the articles in a thematic bundle, or are you reading towards getting to that stage? um, and then you become reading more focused, where you start asking, once I started reading through an article or two, do they propose similar or varied solutions? Do they have a similar discourse, or are there variants in the different discourses or voices? You can start reading to find what is missing in the field or what is potential gaps. You can start asking how effectively is the content presented, and is it framed in line with, for instance, a relevant theory? Does the article highlight a trend or a contentious argument in the field? And so you can start to already think about what you are reading and start asking questions, so that you, even on a very preliminary basis, can start grouping what you are reading in some manner or another. So your review can take different forms. Your review could be purely descriptive, where you bring out themes and trends. Now, purely descriptive literature reviews are very often on honors level or masters with limited scope dissertations, where you might get away with only descriptions. But once you go into a full master's and definitely a PhD, it's required that you address more critical thinking, argumentation in your literature reviews. So where you will then move away from only describing. That means author A said this, author B said that, author C said this, author D said that. You need to get to a stage where you start critically assessing the literature, comparing and contrasting, and that's higher order thinking, raising questions, evaluating and showing relationships so that the key themes emerge. And this is very, very critical in terms of being able to argue, to move to synthesis, to be able to identify various voices on the topic. So we generally, a literature review shouldn't just be descriptions. It should go to a deeper level where you start also analyzing, integrating, and synthesizing the literature and showing evidence of that in your literature review. So we also don't only want literature that supports what you think you would like to support. Let me give you an example. I once, earlier in my life, I did quite a lot of qualitative data analysis. And I had analyzed the students' work or did the data analysis. Then we would get together, we had a consensus discussion. But even in the consensus discussion, the student only looked at the negative aspect of their findings. When I later looked at their literature review, quite accidentally, because I knew the supervisor, I also saw that even in the literature review, they only looked at the negative aspects of this topic. So you don't always want to give only one-sided view. There might be negatives and there might be positives. There might be different views. There might be different voices. So be careful to only look for literature where your searches are biased to what you think you want or what you think the supervisor wants to read, or that you can argue a specific gap. So they can be biased when we start selecting specific articles. So please be careful for that your own biases and trying to find literature for what you think you need to know doesn't overshadow the criticality of you looking at literature. So we've spoken a lot about what a literature review is. Maybe just a note or two on what a literature review is not. So literature review is not just an annotated bibliography of everything that you've read or a summary of every article that you have read. Now, we often fall in this trap because we've read so much, we feel that we need to put everything that we've read in our literature review. So that is not what a literature review is about. And it's not including extended quotations directly or extended, even if it is paraphrased. Remember the first 3 words when we just opened tonight's section? The ability to source, analyze, synthesize in a critical manner. So yes, you do read widely, but you also get, you don't put everything in your literature review if it doesn't deserve space in your literature review. So that's where your critical analysis of the readings come in. Does it contribute to your argument in order to reach a conclusion in your literature review? And that everything that finds its way into your literature review is evaluated and evaluated based on legitimacy finding its way into your literature review. So very important, not everything that you read might end up in your literature review or should end up in your literature review. And then very importantly, that it's your literature review isn't a linear process. So it isn't a process where you go from A to Z in a line. It might look like that way when we read literature reviews, that it looks as if it went from A to B to Z. But in fact, a literature review is a very circular, iterative process of going back and forth. It's not what might start with acquiring articles, reading, identifying, mapping, developing an argument, but you will always find that that as you move on, you might find other sources, other voices, and it might go back, it might lead to a new search, it might lead to questioning what you've written before. So it's a very iterative process. And when we write it up, it seems very linear. But that's not how it actually happens. Neither is your research process linear. We write it up in a dissertation and it looks very linear, but we always go back and forth. And where literature is concerned, you would go back and forth once you have your results or your findings. You will go back to literature to compare and contrast with your findings. You might go back and forth in evaluating further, but it's never really done until the day you submit. And very often the day after that, you'll find that source, that one that you've been looking for. So at some stage, yes, we do need to finish off. But while you're still busy with your research process, you will probably be busy with your literature review as well. So having said that, we need to carefully consider where the literature is best placed in our overall study. So some information like historical or statistical data is best suited for your introduction or background. Some literature might support your research problem or your rationale for the study, your problem statement. Some literature might assist you to identify the gap in literature that might also then inform or provide your justification for embarking on your research. And it's organized around ideas and themes, not the sources themselves. So for now, let's maybe have a look at the different types of literature reviews. Now, the time when I did my PhD, which was in the 2003s, thereabouts, there wasn't really this distinction in different types of literature reviews. You had a literature review and that was it. Now, as we went along, there became certain types of literature reviews with different focuses, and that's where our types of reviews and the different types started to have a greater focus. Now, for an honors study, just a narrative review like we've discussed now, where you read, you put it together in themes, or in other ways. We will talk about the organizing in a bit. But a narrative review or just an ordinary literature review might suffice. So that's a traditional form of focusing on broad topics without specified methodological approaches. Remember, very early on, I said that a literature review has its own method and methodology. Now, when we look at the other types of reviews, they have a very specific methodology. But in a honors study coursework MA, or maybe for your introductory PhD or your proposal, it might suffice just doing a traditional form of a literature review. Now, the other types of reviews is usually reviews that we would find some on master's level, some only on PhD level. And you'll also see that I've added there the typical duration, meaning the time that it takes to do this type of review. Now, if you're an honors student and you only have 6 months for a project, maybe even less, you can imagine you don't have 6 months to spend on a literature review. And therefore, the original, just plain straightforward literature review, which might be called a narrative review, where it typically takes maybe a month to 3 months, would be your way to go. However, as research became more refined, especially on a master's level, the requirements have also shifted, and that it's generally expected now of a PhD student that they will follow a specific type of a review, where there's also a specific methodology involved. And we will go into more depth tomorrow night, especially when we're looking at the critical review. But for now, just an overview. So one can also get a systematic review, which is a highly structured review that answers a defined question with reproducible methodologies. You would find this on an advanced MA or a PhD, and a systematic review can take you anything from 6 to 12 months. A meta-analysis, also a form of a systematic review, that's usually focuses on statistically analyzed results from previous studies, and often used in a PhD where quantitative analysis is required. Also taking up to 6 to 12 months. Scoping review is a review that is very, very useful in the exploratory phases of your research. So on a PhD level, you might conduct a scoping review to map, for instance, key concepts underpinning your research area. the main sources and types of evidence available. So it does literally what the name says. It scopes. It scopes what is available in the field. It scopes what concepts are out there. And a scoping review can be very done in a shorter time, between 6 to 12 months. And very important, you can also publish a scoping review. And that, I must say, journals often are quite happy to publish scoping reviews, because you've kind of scoped the landscape in terms of a specific topic, and that helps other researchers, so that they maybe don't need to do what you did, but they can just back their research on, for instance, your scoping review. So a scoping review is of shorter duration, and a very valuable part of a PhD in exploratory phases, or a scoping review is short enough to do on a master's level as well. Then a critical review, we'll discuss that in more detail tomorrow night, but it critiques all the relevant literature on a topic to establish the current state of knowledge. So for a critical review, you have a certain methodology, also more on an advanced level, between 3 to 6 months, but doesn't take as much time, and the scope isn't as big as, for instance, a systematic review. And then lastly, an integrative review, where we synthesize theoretical and empirical literature to provide a comprehensive understanding of a phenomenon. Usually also on a PhD level, can take around 4 to 8 months. So that there are other names. I think the list is endless, but these are more or less the most prominent types of reviews that you might come across. And that you might think of using. So honors level, masters, coursework masters, the narrative review is quite sufficient. On a scoping review, I found master's dissertations that were based, the entire dissertation based on a scoping review, because it has its own methodology, and that the review in itself becomes an entire dissertation. There are some disciplines that accept that, there are some that don't. But a scoping review always quite helpful. And then other than for the narrative review, that is more often a bit more narrow in scope, all of the other reviews can be published on its own. So that's very useful for PhD students that need to provide evidence of publications before their PhD is conferred, that you can already early in your on your PhD journey potentially already have a publication. All right, so I'm going to give you just a short exercise that you can maybe also move a bit out of your head, and maybe just see if you can identify, based on this slide. Let's see if you've listened well and made notes. If you can identify the type of a review. So the first research scenario is relates to the effects of online learning on university students' mental health. And the objective was to statistically analyze and combine the results of various studies to determine overall trends. So what type of a literature review do we have? Yeah, I'll just go back. So just remember, statistically analyze and combine results to determine overall trends. Let's have a look here. Where do we have statistical analysis? That's in a meta-analysis. So we can maybe think that number one is a meta-analysis. Then if we go to the second research scenario, evolution of marketing strategies in the digital age, the objective to explore broad themes and developments without focusing on a specific research question. What type of a review do you think that is? So if we go back and we look at the very first type, a narrative review or just an ordinary literature review, would be the answer to number 2. Then the role of artificial intelligence in healthcare to map out key concepts, types of evidence, and gaps. Let's see which review would map out key concepts and potential gaps. That's a scoping review. All right, and then I will leave the next 3 for you to try and identify. Comparative effectiveness of cognitive behavior therapy and medication for depression, to gather and critically analyze all relevant studies to evaluate current knowledge and shortcomings. That will be a critical review. Impact of corporate social responsibility on brand loyalty, to synthesize both theoretical and empirical research to provide a comprehensive understanding of the topic. See if you can now identify it. Number 6, nutritional interventions for diabetes management, to answer a specific question about the efficacy of interventions using replicable and systematic methodologies. Okay, I hope that you've been able to identify the types of reviews in terms of the objectives. So the slides will be made available to you. If you are then maybe deciding to choose a specific review, you can then also look, what the objective, for instance, would be for each type of a review. So also some ideas. Remember, right in the beginning, we discussed the importance of the research question or the literature review question to guide you. I've given you a few examples, for instance, of the types of questions one would typically ask related to the types of reviews. So I'm not going to read them all out. I'm sure you've got Reading 101, but if you may be starting on your own literature review and you're not quite sure how to formulate a question for a systematic review or meta-analysis or scoping review, there's some examples for you as well. And I want to get close to stopping with all the theoretical aspects. So here again is just a synopsis of the types of reviews that we could potentially use. Then just I know there's a question that will probably come up about the use of AI, but we'll get to that later in the conversation. But what I wanted to tell you is that you can use applications and data analysis software, especially the qualitative data analysis software like Atlas TI. Currently the version is 25, to also assist you with your literature reviews. So you would need to do the basic searching, but you can use programs like Atlas TI to organize your research. It will assist you in visualizing connections between themes. There is an automatic feature that can identify codes and significant content. But what I urge you to do is to get the manual way of doing a literature review, sorting and initial writing up before you start to dabble with automated software capabilities. It might be very confusing, and you would still need your own brain power to also analyze, or if it does a automatic analysis, that you can check. But definitely there is these abilities within different qualitative data analysis software. And just a screenshot, it might look something like this, where it's very helpful in curating your articles. So you can upload an article, you will have access to it. You can write your notes as you read through the articles, and you can have access to all of that in one space. So very much like you would code qualitative data, you could use the software as a way of assisting you in collating, making notes, and having easy access to these to your literature searches. Now, other than Atlas TI, there are other software that you could also use for scoping reviews and so on. But I've done quite a lot of talking. So what I'd rather want us to do is that we maybe now give you opportunity for questions and answers. And then tomorrow night, we can start with the literature review as a project, where we go through the literature review, specifically a critical review, as a project, where your literature review has an aim, a purpose, a research question, a design, methods, results, conclusions, and that is driven by your project and your research aims. So tomorrow night we will unpack the review as a project, and specifically focus on the application of a critical review. So I'm going to open my camera again. I just want to go back to the main screen, and I hope by this time that you have put down your questions and answers. I just need to upload the Q&A, so just give me a minute. And then please, if you have questions, then we can take care of those now. So please post your questions. There's not that many at the moment. But I'd like us to engage in a bit more of a conversation rather than me just dumping a lot of information on you. So just an important note that the slides will be available on a link that Daneo will publish for us. And then also very important, Daneo asked that I please tell you that along with the link, that the template for the proposal will also be available on that link. So very important that you can refer back to the conversations that we had tonight, that you can also maybe go back to some of the information, some of the exercises, and that can potentially help you if you need to refer back. All right, so let's just see some of your questions. Fettel, you ask, how should you structure convergencies and divergencies in your literature review and still demonstrate a golden thread? I'm so glad the questions regarding the golden thread comes through. So just maybe for others that don't know what we mean when we talk about a golden thread, is that your whole dissertation or your thesis is actually one large argument. And that golden thread is a central message or question that goes throughout your dissertation or your thesis. So in that, we're meaning that we keep to what we say we're going to do, and we don't go walkabout in terms of topics. So what Frettel is saying in terms of convergencies and divergencies, it's the what is similar and what is different, but still demonstrate a golden thread. So your golden thread is your logic and your argument. So if you see that golden thread as your central argument or your central thesis statement, then it is an argument for and against, if I have to put it in very plain form. So your evidence that you gather, I'm so sorry, I'm only seeing, I missed one, but I'll get to you now, Lawrence. So Frettel, in terms of the golden thread, that's your key argument, your key thesis statement, and then your literature will go around the thesis statement and the argument, but both stating first the convergence and the differences around different voices, discourses, but it is around a central theme or central argument or your central topic that will remain central to your dissertation or your thesis. So I hope that answers that. Then just going back, Lawrence, does Google Scholar number of times article is cited be used as a conclusion that the article is genuine? No, not at all. Remember, Google Scholar is trails the web, greater web, not the web of science. It trails the web. So the number of times an article is cited could be a good indication, but it could also, it will definitely not tell you whether the article is genuine. I can tell you now, if I go to my Google Scholar, there are it's not journal articles that it's picked up. It was a guide that I developed for a training session that Google Scholar picks up as an article, and it's not an article. So definitely not whether the article is genuine. In some cases, yes, a high citation rating, you know, that an article is mentioned or writing is mentioned 34,000 times gives you some idea that this might be an important work, important author, but definitely not as a conclusion that the article is necessarily genuine. So Google Scholar per se could give some indication of the standing of an author, but not whether an article is genuine or not. If you want to know if an article is genuine, then go back to the journal, go back inside the journal, see from the journal in which journal it is, how is the journal rated, for instance, and then rather in terms of the genuineness, I would rather say in terms of the quality and speak about quality rather than genuine. So there's a lot of articles that's published in rogue journals. So these are journals that that authors pays a hefty sum to get articles published in 3 days. Now you can imagine what would prompt an author to pay 50 or 60 or 70 or 100,000 rand to get an article published in 3 days. So there are also examples of that, and those articles are printed and they seem genuine, but there is a whole it's Beale's list of predatory journals, and these predatory journals do exactly what I described now. And therefore, one also needs to critically look at what is published within these predatory journals and whether you want to use it for your literature review. Okay, Frettel, I've answered you. Maluta, is a journal rated Q3 an acceptable source? Yes, it is an acceptable source. It simply means that it's not a Q1, not a Q2. It's a bit lower on the ranking, but it's still an acceptable source. So yeah, for a journal to just to appear on one of the quintiles is already a good indicator of the acceptability as a source and potentially also the credibility of a source. And these journals are definitely peer-reviewed. You won't find a journal that is on quintile 1, 2, 3, or 4 that's not peer-reviewed. So yes, many of our local journals are Q3 or Q4. They might be with higher rankings, but these are generally our more local journals. And for local content, very often, not saying that they don't address international themes or concerns, but it's more often contextual in nature, and very often that's also important for our literature review. So go for it. How do you know which literature review to do for each level of study? Okay, Anonymous, if you go back to the slides, there I specifically have the different types of reviews for different levels. So there's a number of aspects that would guide you in terms of which type of literature review. Definitely your level of study, and then the time available. So some reviews take more time than other reviews. So for instance, an honors level or a master's coursework project, a narrative review or scoping review, well, not even a scoping review on honors level. Honors level, just a narrative review or the ordinary literature review. On master's level, scoping review, and potentially you could maybe still get away with a narrative review. But the other types of reviews, like the meta-analysis, the synthesis, the integrative reviews, all take longer, and they are more suitable for PhD level students because they all take quite a bit longer, anything from 6, 8 to 12 months even. Okay, but please go back to the slides when they're available. And I hope that will also just take you back. How do you know which literature review to do for each? Okay, I think it was published twice. Thank you for the presentation. You're welcome. I'd like to find out if the literature review question is different from the research question in the main research. Yes, it could be. You might have your research question might be a broader question, where your literature review question is often much more focused. So say, for instance, I am looking at support strategies for postgraduate students to facilitate their mental health. That's my broader topic. Now, my research question might be, what is the experiences of postgraduate students related to their mental health in postgraduate studies? But if I wanted to do a scoping review, my question might be, what do we know about mental health support strategies for postgraduate students? So it's just about the core concepts will remain. It's just about the phrasing. So your research question is very often broader, and your literature review question much more refined and focused. And also based on the type of review that you do, your question might differ. Okay, so also refer to the slides. There's also a number of examples in terms of the types of questions we would ask for different types of reviews. I've been trying to access the recordings and presentations, but it's failing. It says you need permission to access them. Can you help? No, I can't help, but Duneo might be able to help. But what I can tell you that often might be the problem is if you use an outside email and not your UNISA email, that could deny you access. But I'm not an expert on that. But Duneo will definitely be able to assist with that. But please, if you want to access recordings, please use your UNISA emails, because it is a form of securing the recordings as well. So Duneo is replying to you, and I'm sure you can read it, or if, as soon as I see it, I'll also read it for you. How best can I formulate a research title for my proposal? Anonymous. Sure, I think you're approaching it from the wrong end. You would need to find a research focus and a research topic before you can formulate a research title. Okay, so your title will be based on your proposal, and not your proposal based on the title. So often we formulate titles. We might start off with a working title for our proposal, and then refine it as we go about. But so I think maybe you're asking how best to formulate a topic or a field of inquiry for my proposal, and based on that you would arrive at your title. So what I suggest you do is you start reading on a topic of interest. See if you can identify a gap and a potential focus area, and then you can formulate a title based on that for your proposal. So maybe just approaching it from another angle, that we don't often start off with a title maybe, but we start off rather with a topic or a field of interest. And the research title potentially comes later. Now, also be careful. What I do find students doing when they sign up for a degree or dissertation, and I'm sorry to say I find it even on master's level, is that students look at previous research and then they use those exact titles and just change the context. I'm not saying that you can't do research that's already been done in a different context, but the idea is that you read. Remember, for a PhD, you don't study for a PhD, you read for a PhD. So if you go back to the Oxford days and the Oxford definition, you would never say that I'm studying for a PhD, I'm reading for a PhD. So please let us start with our reading as a basis, and then carry on with the process. As an honor student, what is the ideal literature type to use when expected to write the literature type? I think I've also mentioned it in the slides. Just the generic literature review or a narrative review is fine for a honors level. Okay. What would you state as a difference in, okay, what's the difference in focus between co-guidance and Atlas TI? Thank you. which one would you recommend in terms of comprehensiveness in literature mapping? So Atlas TI is more for analyzing words. It wouldn't necessarily map literature. It would serve as a repository to keep your literature. It can help you with retrieval. You can make notes. You can do searches in and between articles, but that's more or less the extent to what Atlas TI can do. So please look at the different let's say, analytical engines and applications that's there and use them for what they are supposed to be used. All right. There's also different, I didn't really want to open up the issue around AI features like lit maps, for instance. There's literally hundreds. And for mapping, you could use any. But it's also very much garbage in, garbage out again. So even with other engines, other apps, please make sure what you put in. So that's the features of Atlas TI. I'm not so conversant with the coordinates, but I hope that it's at least partially answered your question. When undergoing the abstract process of surveying and analyzing the literature, can the synthesis process yield the researcher's contribution? Sometimes. Yeah, that can definitely inform a model. So yeah, you're surveying the abstract would kind of be the process that you would go in selecting your sources. Then if you've got your literature, then analyzing that could most definitely yield a contribution to a model or a theory or a conceptual framework. Yes. So you can do your literature review and end up with a conceptual framework, or that conceptual framework can then, with your data, lead you to a model or a framework, and be informed by both literature and your findings. Okay. Q1, in conducting a literature review, it may happen that the author of the scholarly paper makes several points that are relevant to the study. And the literature is best placed in the overall study. How many times should a single journal be cited in the review? Maybe you're asking a single author. We usually try to not rely overly on a author. Yes, there are authors that publish prolifically in terms of a specific topic or in a specific field, and that's not saying you can't use them, but it's about that balance. You give voice to them, but you also need to give voice to other authors or other discourses. So it's really about balance. But I do often see, and I do often make comment on my students' work that they're overusing a source. So you can use them more than once, and it's possible to use these authors in different places in your review, as you quite rightly say. It can be placed in different parts. You can use the resource or the source as part of your justification. It might be part of your discussion. It might be part of a thematic theme. So it is possible to use it in different parts, but just be careful for overusing. From your statement, a gap identified must come at some point in the review. Peer description versus integration, synthesis. My question on this level. The Peel point evidence explanation link framework suggests an approach to writing paragraphs. Yes. Does this necessarily mean that every paragraph should reflect a researcher's voice? No, not necessarily. Thank you for the information. Okay, well done for picking up the Peel acronym. It definitely is very useful to make. It also is more or less the form or the formation of an argument. So you make a point, you provide evidence for that point, you can make an explanation about the point, but you also link different points. So your reference to the paragraph means that each paragraph contains a topic, and you can have different authors speaking on that topic. And you can have, for instance, one paragraph on that theme or more than one. But then when you move to the next paragraph or the next theme, that you also show the reader what is the link between the two themes that would find themselves, for instance, in one or two or more paragraphs. So a very important aspect that you're bringing up here is how we write our literature review. And that's quite a big gap. I often find that students do pretty well at reading, but when they need to write, it's a bit more of a struggle. And that's why it's so important to read and write and write and read. And it goes back to the very first words of reading, scoping, and then starting to analyze, to put it, to take it apart. But what students often finds very difficult is the synthesis, when you put it back together, and that you would very often then write in terms of themes and voices and how your paragraphs link, how the topics link, how do they influence each other, and how do they contribute to your overall argument. So if we look at writing styles of your literature review, there's different writing styles. In a PhD, it's more argumentative. And that goes back to the very, very first comment in terms of the golden thread. And this also links to how your point, is this is all part of a larger argument. And where on an honors level, it's more descriptive, but also there I find students struggle to write cohesively. So good idea if it's your first time writing or with any research project to just sharpen the saw. We can all do with skilling ourselves in terms of writing. It takes practice. It doesn't come as easily as it comes when we read it. So I often suggest that something that can also help you with this Peel process is that, I'm so sorry, there's something in my eye, is that we also maybe use mind mapping or mapping out, and then we can, for instance, put together and move around concepts, ideas into themes or paragraphs. And it's easier to move it around outside of your mind than to try and move around it once you've written it. So try to coordinate on you can use, there's the mind mapping tools, there's many different ways of mapping, but that you kind of map it and move it around and then start writing on it. Because when you start moving paragraphs and pieces of paragraphs, that's where it often starts getting disjointed. But people write differently, they build their writing skills, but it's an important skill to have in your literature review and in your research study as a whole. You can do amazing research, but if you can't report it, then it might not come through as amazing as it was. So please practice. When sourcing articles for a research outline, do we use the same articles for the proposal? Yes, sure. Please don't. If you read, then you read and you use your sources. No need to just have sources for an outline and then redo it for your proposal. Your proposal hopefully follows your outline. Okay, so please. Right. Is it mandatory to use one review type, or can you combine two or more? Mandla, please have a look at the types of reviews. They have different purposes. And therefore, it's unlikely that you will mix them. What can happen, and probably only on a PhD level, is that you can have a scoping review initially to scope the study, and then when you see the gap and you've got the results maybe of a scoping review, you can go over to an integrative review or a meta review or something like that. But the scoping review would be potential with another type of review for different reasons. So I hope that answers your question. You can have more than one type of a review for more than one purpose. Okay. Oops, and there I've gone through all the questions. I thought there were still many to come. Yeah, please, if there's any more questions, or Daneo has commented on the ability to access the item. Please select request for access. It will be granted. Okay, so that might have sorted out the issue around that. Another question: at honours level, when submitting a paper as an assignment, is it necessary to include POE that includes raw materials such as interview transcripts and data received as responses, or is it sufficient to submit just the paper? Okay, let me just read more carefully. When submitting a paper as an assignment, okay, is it to include the raw material as into? Okay, what we usually do is that we include quotes from our interviews. You might want to add an interview as an example, as an annexure, but usually in the report itself, we don't provide the full transcript. So if you have maybe conducted 8 interviews, you might provide on each theme or a category, you might give 3 or 4 quotes from different participants, and then you could add 1 or 2 interviews as audit trail or as a quality check, as an annexure. But there's definitely no space to put all of that in your actual paper or your report that you're writing. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question. It's just you kind of in your assignment or in your short report, you just give samples of the responses that speaks to specific findings or topics. I hope that makes it clear, and that would go for any research, not just on a honours level. there's no place to put entire transcripts or all the responses. We choose that becomes our evidence. Okay, similar as we have an argument in a literature review where we make a point and we then provide evidence. The same with your findings. You make a claim that this is your finding, and then you need to back it up with evidence. And these quotes or responses provides the evidence to that claim. So very similar process in the literature review, that you would follow that exact Peel principle, or the outline of an argument. There's a claim, there's evidence, and there's a conclusion. And the same would go in reporting your findings. Okay, I hope that clarifies for you. All right, I don't see new questions, but let's give you a minute or two to consider. What's also possible is if you're anything like me, you might be tired right now, you've just come from work and you needed to sit through another 2-hour session, and the information only starts to gel in your mind later tonight, and you might have a aha question or moment at 3 o'clock tomorrow morning. Please write them down. You can bring them along tomorrow evening when we meet again. And yeah, if you don't have anything to post now, what's the minimum time can one finish the proposal in your experience, Prof? Minimum time to finish a proposal can be anything from a month to 12. There isn't, some people get it right quickly. Sometimes people have been looking at a specific topic long before they may be registered, and might, be ready with a pretty sorted out proposal before they start, and can finish it, and maybe just clean it up in a month or so. But generally, I would say it takes around 6 to 8 months, and maybe up to a year. But I'll be worried if I haven't completed it in a year's time. Sometimes the supervisors, like we said last time, is only appointed later. We're already at in May, and some students might not have a supervisor yet. That might also delay in the completion of a proposal, because you might have a reasonable proposal at hand, but it needs to go through the supervisors. The supervisor might have additions or changes, or a different angle they want you to look at. So, but if everything is in place and you work diligently, I would say around 6 to 8 months. Yeah, I think different departments also vary, but I hope that you are able to do it in around that time. So there are always those that finish quicker. Some of us, if you're new to research, these are all skills, and skills are developed in time. And you also, reading takes time. I think you've seen from all the different reviews in terms of how much time it could take. It could take up to 8 months to do a review on its own, but that wouldn't be for a proposal. So for a proposal, you need to read enough to tell the reader that you know what you're talking about, and that you've read, and that you can provide a background, a problem statement, that you can and a brief overview. Okay. I think that I don't see any new questions. Some say, yes, I have clarified. So As I said, follow-up question, I have data accumulated over the past 3 years, which is before my registration. Is that data usable? No. Ethically, it's not usable. You can only collect data after you have received ethical clearance, and ethical clearance can't be granted retrospectively. So no, you can't use that data. All right, not if it is. So it also depends, I guess, what type of data it is. If it was interview data or data like that, no, you can't use it. If it's other data, for instance, that's publicly available or so, you might be able to use it. But if you got it from human participants, then no, you can't use it. Okay. All right, then I'm going to close for this evening. I don't see any other questions. Going, gone. Then thank you so much for your active participation. It's always lovely to have you actively engaged. And then we will see each other the same time again tomorrow evening. And then we will go into more depth in terms of the process and specifically looking at critical review, and maybe also look at other questions that you might have had in the meantime. So from me, have a lovely evening, go and rest a bit, and then we'll meet each other again tomorrow evening.